We have some questions or comments on root zone scaling and some of the data that we've been provided and how this may relate to the early warning process and GAC's role in that. So are there questions or comments on that? Netherlands, please.
Our basic question, I think we discussed this beforehand in plenary, is the fact that we have a kind of different expectations, different wordings, different signals in this during this meeting than we had, I think, in the Brussels meeting with the board. Basically, what we heard, and we didn't hear it in our, let's say, not in the presentation Kurt gave to us, but it was in other setting with GNSO, that it's probable, it's thinkable that the ICANN can accommodate, will accommodate, let's say, more than 500 or more than a couple of hundreds of applications in the first round. I think of course, it's admirable if you can have all the systems, the processing, the services available on time. But we still have, I think, two concerns. One concern is that we had a kind of understanding in Brussels that after the first batch we had a thinking and understanding in a couple of hundreds that will be a kind of evaluation about what's really the impact of the, let's say, the first insertions in the root zone after a while. And that the second round would be deferred until there's something coming out of the evaluation of how the root zone system works or reacts on this. So in case in the first round there is not a kind of batching, but we have, let's say, an explosion of 1,000 or 1,200 applications. It will, of course, interact. It will have repercussions on our, let's say, on root scaling agreement we had, I think, in Brussels on this. And the second thing is, basically, it depends also on how the batching is going to be arranged. And if you, how do you plan this introduction? Will this be batched? Will this be one round? And then if the applications come in after a certain time, there will be a one-time posting of all the applications being in. Because that's basically the trigger point for our early warning within the GAC. And our early warning is, of course, we have also restricted resources. If we come up with a list of 1,200, it's a little bit different than a list of 150 new applications. So that's these two questions we are struggling with, and we would like to have some answer indication. Thank you.
So I think there really are two quite different things that we're talking about here. The early warning with respect to strings is a process for review of those strings, and you're asking a question, I believe, about the capacity from a personnel point of view within the GAC and within the rest of the administrative processes to process those applications, to give due consideration to those strings and what the time frame is for those responses. Perfectly fair question. Separate and apart from that is the terminology that you've used is the impact on the root server system, which suggests that the name servers themselves would show some evidence of stress because of the addition of new names into the name servers. That's it seems to be some persistent confusion and misunderstanding in my judgment about that. The name servers, the few hundred Anycast instances around the world regularly process on the order of 10,000 queries a day per second. This is huge numbers. The variation on a second-to-second basis, on a minute-to-minute basis, and during the course of a day, and at various changes on a seasonal basis, are very large changes in those numbers. The addition of a new 1 or 2 or 100 or 1,000 names into the root server system almost certainly will generate no measurable change that you can see because of the ordinary changes ordinary variations that are taking. It's fair to look at that if you wish, and there will be people who are monitoring things very closely. And I'm given to understand there will be a report carefully documenting the before and after and explaining all of this. But I think it's important to set the expectations here that the relationship between adding new names into the root zone is almost completely, if not 100%, decoupled from anything measurable in terms of the performance as seen by the users, or even, for that matter, seen by the internal distribution processes within each of the root server operators. I suspect that there is a misunderstanding that has taken flower and seems to be spread, and I'd like to find a way to settle it down. And as I said, I think some very careful documentation structured in a way that is readable not only by technical people and by GAC personnel, but also one that can be shared with broader audiences or more senior people in government would be very helpful in laying out this very clearly and laying any misunderstandings to rest.
As you may recall, the board passed a resolution that stated that the maximum number of TLDs that could be delegated into the root under the new gTLD program on an annual basis is 1,000, and the number may not exceed that unless there's a formal review or a new decision by the board. So that was the limit that was determined and established by resolution, and we will fully respect that. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to echo what my colleague from the Netherlands was raising. Those issues, because really the amount of new gTLDs that's going to be launched, that's going to come to, is also going to end up in our lab in this early warning system. Of course, it's going to be huge different to deal with thousands or maybe a couple of thousands of strings, and if you compare it to a couple of hundreds. And actually, when we listened to Pritz, who made a very good presentation early in the week, we got the impression, or we understood that the ICANN has, so the ICANN staff and the ICANN board has a very good dialogue with the technical community or the experts, the Root Server System Stability Committee and the Security and Stability Advisory Committee and so on, and another, of course, expert in the technical community. And that is very reassuring from our point of view, and it's also very, very important, because we are governments, we have concerns, but we have not really the experts. But I would like to say another thing. What I got the impression of, I hope I understood it, is also the RSAC group had some kind of proposal of early warning, not an early warning in the GAC early warning, but an early warning actually from the technical perspective, from the root server system, and. I don't know whether you're working on that one or also you have some dialogue on that one. Maybe you have, but that is also out of interest for us actually to know, because that has implications on our policy, public policy, and our concerns and issues. And I think it's very, very important that we have this early warning, whatever it is, systems in place before things starts, and it's going to start very soon now, because I think it's very important. It's accountability for ICANN. It's accountability for us as an advisory committee that this whole systems in which we are all of us involved right now is actually going to work. So it's not going to go down the drain. So we need to make sure that it's going to happen. And that was also, and now I feel a little bit like a parrot, saying the same thing every meeting when we have the opportunity to meet you from the ICANN board, that I really hoped, and I still do, that we could have a limited first round and have a good evaluation from all the perspectives that is necessary, and then take into account the the information we got, and then could move on to the next step, to the second round. Thank you.
I will gladly leave the word to the board if they want to react immediately to this point, and I will take the word afterwards.
2 points. The first one is related to the question that Thomas asked, the first one, and the answer of Steve. There is indeed a distinction that is important that Steve has highlighted, and maybe one way to highlight this distinction is to say that the stress on the root servers that are distributed are more related to the number of users than the number of TLDs. This is a very important distinction. Overall, on a daily functioning, the stress on the root servers is related to the number of users that are actually querying. It will increase a little bit because it will take time for the mirrors and all the cache and all the replications to get all the addresses. But overall, the load is not fundamentally related to the number of TLDs, but more to the number of users. The other stress, which is different, is the number of updates to the database that come from changing the servers, from changing the address of who manages the registry, and so on. But this is a completely different type of load, and I'm trying to express that in a way that marks the distinction. It is very important in our discussion that we are completely clear about that distinction, because it's a very important element in relation to the root scaling and the dangers. And it is extremely important in particular that you have all the elements to report back, because this question is going to be asked over and over again. And if we are not clear, tell us, and we will clarify. We will try to find the arguments that you can use. The second point is regarding the workload on the early warning. It's absolutely true that the workload on the early warning will be heavier if there is 1,200 or 500. This is true. And we all know the problem of bandwidth. I would like to share and maybe make a methodological suggestion, because one of the dangers for everybody, both for the board, the staff, and the structure as a whole, and for the GAC, is if you want to provide one single early warning. Why is that? Because you will have to wait until you agree on every single potential problem on TLDs before you provide the output. I would suggest that you explore something along an important distinction. Among the list of TLDs, hopefully there will not be too many that will be problematic, but we don't know. There is an important distinction between those where there is a problem from the GAC point of view regarding the string. And to be caricatural, there may be strings or applications where the GAC as a whole or some GAC members will say, we don't even want to explore who is applying for that string. That string is a problem. This is different from a situation where there is a problem with one particular applicant for a given string that in itself doesn't pose a problem. Because then the early warning is much more directed towards the applicant himself, like saying you didn't contact the corresponding local authority, or you're missing a point, and so on. So I would encourage to maybe do a sort of two-pass system to try to narrow down very early on what are the strings that you believe are causing a problem in themselves, and identifying among them, if any, hopefully there will be none, but if any, those where there is a real obvious consensus on the GAC that there is a problem that needs to be addressed, and those where there is a problem for some countries and others. But I would encourage to try to design something, and maybe we can discuss further on how to make it efficient, that will be a flexible modality so that you can produce early warnings on an ongoing and stage-by-stage basis instead of waiting until you have an agreement on all the early warnings you're going to provide. I hope this helps, and we're all crossing fingers that people will be smart enough and respectful enough of the spirit of the program not to make applications that are really problematic.
Thank you very much to the board members for their insights. On root zone scaling, I think that Dr. Crocker mentioned a report that is going to be published on the matter, I imagine. It would be very important to have that report as soon as possible, and it is important to have policy summaries that will certainly simplify our work when talking to our political masters, so to speak. But the Commission would also like to have the full report with all the technical data, all the methodology, explanation methodologies that have been used, because we want to share that report with our own experts too, and be able to help you to be confident all together on the resilience of the overall system. On the early warning, the Commission would like to thank Bertrand de la Chapelle for the suggestions, which will certainly be taken into account by us. We are internally discussing how to streamline our work. I don't want to go into detail, as this is a discussion that is still ongoing. But one thing that the Commission has already raised with the ICANN staff, with whom we have met a couple of days ago, and I raise it again with the board, we understand that ICANN is building an internal system to handle the new applications on your side. It will be very important for GAC to have access, to have an interface to that system in order to be able to consider how to automate our work as well. So the Commission is hopeful that this discussion can proceed as quickly as possible. And then on the early warning and new gTLDs, thanks to the CEO, to Mr. Beckstrom, for reminding us of the limit of 1,000 new gTLDs. My question is, did ICANN base their calculations on the deadlines by when they will provide us with the full list of gTLDs on which we are supposed to provide a possibly early warning? Did they calculate their deadline on this maximum amount? Or in other words, the deadline that you set for yourself to communicate to us all the gTLDs with all the verification done on your side at that stage, is it calculated on 1,000 new gTLDs? Or 100 on 200, and if you calculated it on 100, what happens if you receive 1,000 applications? Are you confident that you're going to respect the deadline that you communicated to us? And if not, what's going to happen? Thank you. I hope this last point was clear enough. If not, I'm happy to elaborate.
In May, approximately 1 month after the application window closes, we will be publishing all of the strings publicly, so it's known what has been applied for, and that will be the total list of whatever number of applications has been received during the application period. Firstly. Secondly, the current plan is to process the applications in batches of 500. So I think that we've taken that into consideration when we looked at the early warning period, but I'll check into that in more depth and come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. So, Suzanne.
First, I want to reinforce a couple of the points that have been made, particularly by Steve. That, first of all, given the limitations that have been committed to, as Raj just mentioned, and as previously discussed, there's not an urgent issue here. There are concerns, there are that do need to be addressed and have been committed to be addressed. But there is more to be gained by taking the time to have these conversations and make sure that we fully understand, given that limits have been agreed to that are conservative in the minds of everyone who's looked carefully at this. For RSAC specifically, I believe it was Maria made a reference to some work that's been undertaken. There has been some work within the committee on a shared set of metrics, as much in the interests of transparency and facilitating research, frankly, as because there are specific concerns for the root servers about root scaling. And also, I believe Steve made an allusion, I'm losing track of who mentioned this, but there are good working relationships in place, and the technical folks outside of ICANN are looking forward to working with staff on making sure that the technical issues are addressed. It does make sense, though, to also reinforce the distinction that I believe Bertrand particularly spoke to between policy issues and technical operational ones. And I believe that one of the benefits of the long discussion that we all had on this issue was that there is a reasonable set of clear separations among those things and reasonable plans for tackling all of them. So I think we're in a good place on that, but we need to keep moving forward, and we look forward to working particularly with the staff on that.
Okay, Germany.
I just want to come back to the presentation made by Bertrand in this respect on the evaluation process and the early warning system. I think it seems, your comment seems to be rather sensible to have a distinction between the evaluation of the string on one side and the other side, the evaluation of the applicant. Having said that, from a practical standpoint, that might be rather difficult, because imagine we receive on the 1st of May or 2nd of May or 29th of April a complete list with strings. Okay, a string evaluation is rather easy to be made. Rather easy, just to say. But an evaluation of the applicant, and in particular, it's not only the name of the applicant. You need to know what is the model he is following, what are the registration policies, what are the restrictions. I think this, frankly speaking, is not possible within a time frame of 60 days. This is something I would really be hesitative to have such kind of evaluation during this period. And having said that, I also would like to second my colleague from the European Commission. I think we really need to consider what will be the possibilities for the government for the early warning system if there's really a significant decrease of application. We had considered up to now something like 500. If it really is significantly more than these 500, then it would be also a capacity problems for us to proceed these 500 these applications, because we as government have not the privilege to extend the time. We are bound by the 60 days. Thank you.
Thanks, Hubert, for your question. We will publish the applications, which are essentially the information in questions 1 through 13. So, and then more. So there'll be the string, and then the applicant, and the purpose of the application, and the answer to many of the questions, so that the GAC can use that to make its determinations. Now, what might be helpful for the GAC, and what we'd like to hear, is a way. Thank you. I have a handheld. So maybe there's a way we can sort the data. So we're planning, as Rod mentioned, we're gonna publish the information on a date certain after we receive the applications. If you would, we could give that information to you now, what's going to be published, and perhaps you could get back to us with a way that we could sort that data so it would be more helpful to you, so you can kind of run your finger down it easily.
Thank you, Kurt. Switzerland.
In principle, it would be useful to be able to express an early warning first on the string, and then on second level on the applicant and or on his business model. But something that I start to realize, which is, at least in my head, slightly reducing the value of this whole early warning system, and I put it as a question to the board, is my perception right that in case we would realize that there is a string that we do not think is problematic, we look at the applicant, and then we look at his business models or registrar conditions, whatever, and then realize that something is not applicable to our law in our country. And then you issue an early warning saying, like, basically everything would be fine, but we have a problem there, we cannot accept this. What is the use of this, if I get this right, that if the applicant cannot modify his application, he can only withdraw it? Is that right? That's the only answer you can give, unless this exception with geographic names and seeking government support. But if you, for instance, in an early warning detect a minor flaw which would cause you to file an objection against it, the applicant can only decide, I go nevertheless, or I withdraw. There's nothing in between. Is that right? And then, yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Kurt, please.
So that question reflects a good understanding. We're loath to allow applicants to fully change their application because that would allow applicants to abuse the system, get an application in as a test, and if that test sort of fails, they can sort of get around the system by amending it. But there are ways an applicant can address government concerns. For example, in the case of a geographic name, it can secure the approval of the government. Or there may be conditions a government would have before it would otherwise approve delegation of a name, so it can put the applicant on notice that the GAC will probably give GAC advice or encourage an objection in some way. So there are ways for governments to use the early warning effectively. And then, of course, the other use for GAC advice is to put the applicant on notice that there is going to be GAC advice or an objection to it and give him or her the opportunity to withdraw early for a higher refund. And so we're trying to encourage the applicants to heed the GAC early warning in that way.
Thank you, Kurt. Bertrand.
One very quick comments both on Hubert and Thomas's questions. What we're trying to put in place is a communication channel, and the whole discussion we had during the elaboration of the applicant guidebook is to identify tools for interaction, not to box the capacity for the GAC in particular to make a comment at one moment and not later and so on. What was attempted was to provide a way for intervening at different stages. And there are, as Thomas has said, there are different types of problems that may emerge. I think the proposal that Andrea made of having an interface or something that is facilitating the interaction is in the spirit of what we're trying to put in place. Identifying as early as possible, and the early warning bears its name very well. Identifying problems as early as possible is beneficial for everybody, including for the applicants. And so there might be cases where there is a general problem with the string. There are cases where there is a specific problem for one or several applicants because with that type of string, they should have done something more than what they've done, for instance, and they would be encouraged to move forward. And there can be cases where one or several specific countries have a particular problem that can or cannot be addressed, and where the applicant will or will not withdraw in the end. But what I would like to highlight here is the notion of a continuous process that will move all along the evaluation, the objections, and all those components that have been put in the program as protections. As a general remark, what we've all attempted to do is to find something that combines two very difficult things to combine. One is openness, and the other side is protections. And the whole process of dialogue with the GAC and the early warning and the advice, the various level of advices, are intended to make sure that there is always an avenue for interaction when there's a problem. I think that's the best answer we can give at that moment. And the questions that you're asking, we need to keep asking them in parallel with using the process so that we improve it as much as we move forward.
You said in case there would be more than 500, you would divide this in batches of 500, that you would proceed kind of one after the other. In case you receive 4,000 applications, how do you decide which ones are going to be in the first batch and which ones are going to be in the last batch? Will that be according to the date that they actually hand in their applications, or those from A to G and then those from G? What is your reflection in how to divide these into batches? Thank you.
Rod, please.
We are still working on this issue. There's some complex legal implications, and also there's some technical or operational issues, but we haven't locked down on a specific batching algorithm yet. But we will be doing that, and when we do, we will be sharing it. Thank you.
Thank you. European Commission.
When you say that you're going to process batches of 500 applications, does it mean that you're going to, how can I put it? Does it mean that you're going to present to us only 500 applications, and then the next 500 are going to come later? Or I would like a clarification because that's quite unclear to me.
The application window will be open from January 12th until April 12th. There's no limit on the number of applications that may be submitted in that time frame. If the number of applications that is received is over 500, then we will have to look at the issue of how do we handle or how do we process those applications in batches. And the current intention is to do that in a number of around 500 per batch. So it depends on if there's a higher number than 500, then we will need to do some batch processing. If the number is lower than 500, then we will begin the processing. Yes, they'll all be posted at the same time. So all the applications received, we will publish the information in May on the date certain, as Kurt mentioned, with the publicly available information.
The Netherlands, please.
No, that Kurt has a telephone. Oh, sorry, the microphone. Just one, I think, very essential question about remediating an application. I understand that you don't want to have applicants gaming the system and changing their application. But in certain cases, which are not only geographic, but also others, like dot sector, an example of whatever sector. Imagine, just to be to have a concrete example, imagine that after talks with GAC members, after an early warning, that the registry would then maybe make a stricter policy and say, for example, that on the second level there is organization.sector, and he would say, okay, I want this to have stricter, for example, a registered name from organization on the second level, but with a minimum of 10 countries existent origins. My question basically is on what extent do you have the possibility of having a stricter policy which will then alleviate concerns of some governments or the whole GAC? Thank you.
So what the guidebook says is that an applicant cannot materially change their application, and it's interesting to talk about specific examples like this, but I don't want to give an indication whether a certain specific example of a change would be allowable, because we want to maintain the goals of making it not gameable, but we also understand that a registry might want to further restrict its application, make it more narrow in order to bring it into the goals of what the government has. So there's some limited opportunity to adjust how they're going to operate the registry without amending their application. So as long as it's within those guidelines of getting to the goal of not being able to game. But other than that, I don't want to really comment on a specific application that people might rely on later on.